If you own stocks, bonds, or a retirement account, one company already has a say in what happens to your money. They manage $14 trillion. But that's not the part you should worry about. Their software controls another $25 trillion across 200 institutions, central banks, and pension funds. We pulled every filing, every contract, and every acquisition. Here's what nobody connects. First, how one company became the largest shareholder in almost every major American corporation. Second, the software system that central banks and governments depend on. Third, why BlackRock just spent $22.8 billion buying physical ports and infrastructure around the world. This isn't conspiracy. Every number comes from public filings, government databases, and BlackRock's own reports. The question isn't whether this is happening. The question is why more people aren't paying attention. BlackRock manages $14 trillion. That makes them the largest asset manager on Earth, bigger than the GDP of every country except the US and China. But here's what matters more than the money. BlackRock is one of three giants. Together with Vanguard and State Street, researchers call them the Big Three. And the Big Three combined are the single largest shareholder in about 88% of S&P 500 companies. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, JP Morgan. Between the three of them, they hold the top position in almost every major American corporation. BlackRock alone is the top investor in just 38 companies. But the three together vote the shares of nearly the entire index. How did this happen? Index funds. When you buy an S&P 500 index fund, you don't pick stocks. You hand your voting rights to whoever runs that fund. For hundreds of millions of people, that fund manager is BlackRock. Here's why that matters. Every share of stock comes with a vote. You might own 100 shares of Apple through your 401k, but you never vote those shares. BlackRock does. They vote on CEO pay. They vote on board members. They vote on mergers and climate policy. Across the whole S&P 500, about 24% of all shares are now held by passive funds. That number was just 7% a decade ago. BlackRock launched a program called Voting Choice that lets some big clients vote for themselves. It covers $885 billion in assets. But most shares are still voted by BlackRock's own team. A small group of people making decisions that affect your retirement, your savings, and the companies you use every day. That's not just money management, that's something much bigger. In 1988, Larry Fink built a risk tool inside BlackRock. He called it Aladdin. It started small, just a way to track bonds and measure risk. Today, Aladdin watches over $25 trillion in assets. That's almost double BlackRock's own $14 trillion. More than 200 big firms run their money through this system. Pension funds, insurance firms, central banks in 70 countries. They all use Aladdin to check risk, price assets, and make choices. Stop and think about that. The tool that tells a central bank in Europe whether its bonds are safe was built by BlackRock, the same company that owns a stake in the banks those bonds come from. But the story goes deeper. In 2008, the whole financial system nearly broke. Banks were drowning in bad debt. And when the Federal Reserve needed someone to figure out what those debts were worth, they picked BlackRock. Not Goldman Sachs, not JP Morgan, BlackRock. They helped the New York Fed and the Treasury sort through $130 billion of toxic assets from Bear Stearns, AIG, and Citigroup. That means the company trusted to clean up the mess was the same one selling risk tools to everyone else. And it didn't end there. Right now on federal spending records, you can find contracts between BlackRock and PBGC. That's the agency that backs American pensions. BlackRock doesn't just manage money. They help run the systems that keep your money safe. In October 2024, BlackRock bought a firm called Global Infrastructure Partners for $12.5 billion. That one deal gave them $170 billion in real assets. Airports, data centers, energy grids, over 300 projects in 100 countries. But that was just the start. In March 2025, BlackRock announced a $22.8 billion deal to buy 43 ports in 23 countries. 2 of them sat on the Panama Canal. The deal was so large that it triggered a geopolitical standoff. China launched an antitrust review. Panama's Supreme Court voided the canal port contracts, and the government seized the terminals. As of now, BlackRock is still negotiating for the remaining 41 ports. The Panama ports are gone, but the ambition isn't, and they didn't stop at ports. BlackRock launched something called Build. It's a fund that holds U.S. Treasury bonds but lives on a blockchain. It grew to $2.5 billion in assets. Binance now lets traders use it as collateral. BlackRock also picked Galaxy Digital to help run their Ethereum ETF. Then they bought Elmtree, a real estate firm with $7.3 billion in buildings. Larry Fink wrote his 2026 letter and laid it all out. He said America needs $10 trillion in new roads, bridges, data centers, and power grids. He put up $100 million to train the workers who will build them. Think about what this means. Asset managers buy and sell stocks and bonds. They don't own ports. They don't build blockchains. They don't train welders. But BlackRock does. The old label no longer fits. Owning pieces of every company is one thing. But what BlackRock built next changed the entire game. Because they don't just own assets. They built the system that tells other people how to manage theirs. So they own the largest shares. They run the risk system. That alone would make any company powerful. But what Larry Fink did next moves BlackRock into territory that doesn't look like an asset manager at all. Let's connect the three threads. Through passive index funds, BlackRock votes on behalf of millions of shareholders in 90% of the largest American companies. Through Aladdin, they provide the risk management system that central banks, pension funds, and 200 institutions across 70 countries depend on. Through acquisitions like GIP, Panama Canal ports, and tokenized funds, they are buying physical infrastructure that people use every day. Each layer on its own looks normal. An asset manager managing assets, a software company licensing software, an investor buying real estate. But when you connect them, the picture becomes something that the label asset manager can no longer explain. Now here's the part that actually matters to you. If you have a 401k or a pension, there's a good chance BlackRock is voting those shares on your behalf. Have you ever checked how? Most people haven't. If your retirement fund runs on Aladdin, the risk calculations shaping your future were built by one company. And that infrastructure we talked about, ports, pipelines, data centers, that shows up in your energy bill, your shipping costs, the price you pay for almost everything that moves through the global supply chain. This isn't about watching BlackRock's stock price. This is about looking at your daily life and asking, now that I know the structure, what do I see differently? The news calls BlackRock an asset manager, and they are. But what we showed you today goes beyond that label: voting power over 90% of major American companies, a risk management system trusted by central banks across 70 countries, and a $22 billion bet on physical infrastructure from ports to data centers. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing is for you to decide, but you should know it's happening. When you see the structure, you see the opportunity. Subscribe so you don't miss the next analysis. We're just getting started.